In the Digitalist papers, as you've seen already, we've created intentionally a space for vision setting. And the essay that we will dive into next has set a very ambitious vision of promoting inclusive and comprehensive democratic action with artificial intelligence. We will learn more about it and how to get to this vision in conversation with the essay's co-authors. So please join me in welcoming them on stage. Reverend Johnnie Moore, a global evangelical leader, best known for his work at the intersection of faith and foreign policy, especially in the Middle East. Reverend Moore is a popular author, teacher, business person, and acclaimed human rights and religious freedom activist whose effective advocacy has materially impacted policy in many nations. And Mona Hamdy, the founder and managing director of Anomaly, a world-building data systems company and a teaching fellow of applied ethics at Harvard. Hamdy co-founded El Beya Corporation, a regional regenerative land development company based in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Please welcome them on stage for me. Thank you. Mona and Johnnie, thank you for joining us today. I just want to point out to our audience that your co-authorship team, which includes Glenn Weil, brings together different ethnicities, religions, backgrounds, and cultures. It seems that you come from such different places. I think that's fair to say. Tell us more about the intentionality behind the diversity of your co-authorship team and how that is built into your work.
Well, first of all, we actually, while we're different, the fundamental premise of our essay, we agree. I mean, the whole argument that we're making is that there are a group of people that are shaping the future for the rest of us, and that argument is dominated by a couple of like overarching ideologies, and the current trajectory that we're on with accelerating technological innovation is also risking the acceleration of the adoption of one of these two ideologies. Technocracy, a technocratic approach, or a libertarian approach. And so, yeah, we are way different. We laugh about how different we are, but at the fundamental basis of all of this, we're asking whether the status quo is a good thing. Are we okay with this? Is this the world that we want? And who is left out of the conversation. And that's where I think our difference actually contributes a lot.
Yeah, I think we don't agree. We agree, right? And I think that's sort of, we're very rooted in this idea that we have to work with people we don't agree with, and that you can't reconcile differences in a silo. There's no such thing as de-escalation from inside an echo chamber. And so how do you reach across an aisle if it's, inside the house, if there's nobody on the other side? And so we come from pretty divergent, I think, faith traditions and points of view and, perspectives. And to us, the future that we're talking about is really about that. When you talk about a pluralistic vision for the future, it's sort of like your data sets. It's like your training models. The value is in the uniqueness and in the difference and not in the match, right? And that's sort of the comprehensive vision. And how do you make unum out of the pluribus? You talk to people that you don't align with. And I think that's probably where we wanted to start, was this idea that we have to come together and do it. If we want to model it for anyone, you've got to walk the walk. And so that's what we try to do.
And it's so much more fun that way.
Not always. No, it's fun.
And probably the controversy between us, as authors, left, right, and center, different religions, different backgrounds. I mean, I'm an evangelical. Very, very rare, in environments like this, probably. But we're actually probably more controversial in our own communities for being willing to cooperate together. That's actually where the issue is. The issue isn't between the three of us.
That's right.
And I think we're totally convinced that when more of that happens, people discover how exciting it is to collaborate, and actually how quite easy it is. It just takes a conversation.
Well, the previous panel talked about the need for cross-sectoral collaboration, and as Mona just said, you walk the walk. So you're coming not only from different backgrounds, but also with different perspectives. But your core message is quite unified. Your core message is one of plurality. And at the heart of that, in your vision, AI should be a tool that enables and promotes human flourishing. Can you tell us more about that?
So I think this is so unique. The bedrock to our trio, I think, and to our philosophy is really based in this idea that fundamentally, and in light of this image that you see before you today, is our Americanness, is fundamentally this idea that our democracy and the ideals that underpin it give and endow upon a human certain privileges and expectations and duties and rights. And we're at a place where those are being digitally extended in ways that we are not fully aware of, in ways that we don't actively, perhaps globally participate in, and at such a speed and with such a force that most of those things, we heard a lot about authoritarianism today, and I think that we would say that one of the greater threats is what happens if the speed at which we build that infrastructure in a place like this creates authoritarianism inside the rails or inside the house. And I think that's where we would start, is safeguarding that and endowing our citizens, or endowing each individual with the tools and the information to be able to build in a way that's reflective of the governance models we want to see.
Yeah, and democracy is, by its nature, a mess. And American history, by the way, is a mess. I mean, we were just remembering backstage a few minutes ago the transition between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. I mean, John Adams literally said that Thomas Jefferson becoming president of the United States was going to be the end of the republic. He boycotted the inauguration of the next president of the United States. He, in effect, packed the courts. We have this entire messy history and also this healthy paranoia that we're all about to lose all of it. And I think somehow that protects us from losing all of it. Every generation sees the existential threats that we face. What we have now, because of this new technology, is we actually have the opportunity to get feedback from the masses on scale and to introduce one another to each other on scale. And unfortunately, we got a bad start with the first round of this with the social media revolution. And this is moving far more rapidly. It is far more dangerous. But at least I'm an optimist. I think Mona's an optimist too. You might call this realist. That you have IQ, EQ, and a friend of mine says RQ, the reality quotient. Not just the emotional and intellectual quotient. And I think that we do, because we're having this conversation now, we do have the opportunity to get it right.
I think that flourishing, to that point about getting it right, when we're talking about flourishing, we're talking about that fundamental thing. The underpinning is freedom, is the idea that you have the ability, the awareness, the autonomy, and the power, the individual power to be able to create a life for yourself that is meaningful. What does that mean? What stakeholders have to be at the table? I think we argue collectively that it's all of us, plus the very physical world in which we find ourselves all coexisting. So in our paper, we make an argument for people who have divergent views that are probably disproportionately underrepresented in places like this, and infrastructure like the ecosystem and the environment and the commonly held, wonders and beauties of this planet that don't get, a voice or a say, but are certainly things that factor into the advance and the progress on which we're building all of this. Thriving takes that all into consideration, I would say.
Of course, and what you're advocating for is the incorporation of sacral and spiritual values in the development of AI. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big part of our essay. So we basically take as case studies, when we say who's left out of this conversation, Mona does a masterful job addressing the whole ecological space. A lot of information that's not in the system, right now, and I wouldn't dare tread on her expertise. And I mainly focus on the role of religion, in all of this. I mean, here's a fact of the matter, okay? The world is getting more religious. It's not getting less religious. I mean, even in the United States of America, where there was this trajectory that people were watching of the rise of the nuns, right, the non-affiliated religious people, a few years ago it flatlined, and in the last year it's actually going down. The most recent data is that by 2050, only 13% of the world will be religiously unaffiliated, and religion is growing fastest at the countries with the fastest birth rate around the world. And so, that's just like one example of, in my case, my community, there's 700 million of us, okay? We're a third of the electorate in the United States of America. We are equally as significant in many other countries around the world. And yet, when you look at the conversation around any emerging technology, the experts that come from revered, amazing institutions like this one, they're just huge swaths of society that are left out. And you don't have to be religious or individually devout in order to recognize that religion has something to say in this conversation. I mean, you could say that religion is a type of architecture for life. You could say that religion is the compounding effect of wisdom over the centuries. It's caused a lot of harm, but it's also brought a lot of good to the world. And if you're asking questions like, what is the world that we're going to create with this new technology? Maybe religious actors, maybe religious leaders, maybe theologians, maybe practitioners as well have something more to say in this conversation. And then ironically, these two ideologies that are the autocratic, sort of technocratic version of this and the more libertarian version of this actually seem, from the outside looking in, very often they look religious. They have sort of doctrine, and people are really, really committed to beliefs. I mean, if you're on the one side, if you read Mark Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto, he literally and his collaborators use the words "we believe" over 100 times in that essay. Okay. If you look at the other side, the sort of libertarian approach to this new technology, you find a pronounced theology that's sort of adverse to most religious ideas related to community. That we need one another, that we need a moral framework, that human beings aren't optimized to have maximal freedom. They need to have systems around them. Centuries of theology related to the good of work, the dignity of work, the dignity of individual humans. We're all, in the Abrahamic traditions, we're all made in the image of God. We need equality, and so
I think it's,
I'm gonna lapse into a sermon.
No, yeah, exactly.
I'm going to challenge both of you.
Yeah, go
Your
ahead.
point here. The Digitalist papers is not only about ambitious vision setting, it's also about actionable strategies. So I hear you. I want to hear more from you about what do you think are the next steps we should be taking to come closer to your vision.
So we heard a lot today about transparency and trust, and I think I would push back and say that we use technologies that we don't understand or that we don't trust all the time. To use an app that perhaps has a terms of service that was violated, that is still really convenient, that has used your data in a way that is not according to the TOS, but you've used anyway. Do you trust it? No. Do you use it? Yeah, all the time. The first adaptation of right? Sorry to be the bubble pricker here. The other thing is about, because that's how people really live. So I understand how we say that we want to live, but we have a technology that has immense implications for our digitally extended selves. We should understand how we really use them. And we should do it with natural language governance. We should be transparent and honest in real time with real language to people so that they can understand the truth. We do this in government all the time. When you're chosen for a jury, we're very selective, as Mr. Lessig says famously when he makes lawyers, in the kind of information that we give to people and when we give it to them. We should be doing that same thing with the sacred truth, not alternative facts, not hype about the world ending, the truth about what technology can do, so that we can make collectively well-informed decisions. And I think where would that be manifest? In voting, for example, in the United States, quadratic voting, very extreme granularity on what people care about and how much they care about it. We heard famous experiments. Glenn, our third writer, who's working with Audrey, and you heard from Saffron about wonderful experiments happening around the world. In the United States, we can embody our democracy with this technology to safeguard those things that make us a democratic republic. Yeah, so I would do that. Transparency, honest language, and innovative voting systems to include everyone.
Yeah,
I would start there, and a lot more. I'm pretty mouthy about
Johnnie,
it.
I think you're going to like the next point I'm going to make, which is because you're already engaged in policy making. I want to hear from you specifically a bit more about what policy recommendations you want to put around this vision.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add a few to the list. Number one, while we're all obsessed over DEI or the contra DEI or all of these things, we need to acknowledge that there wasn't a perspectival component to DEI. We don't have enough people that have pronounced disagreements in all of our institutions, in all of our businesses. I mean, all one has to do is look at the political affiliations or the attitudes towards religion or the size of the religion faculties, or I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And when you're talking about deity-like power, when it comes to AI, there ought to be someone there, gathering upon centuries of wisdom, saying, like, there's a moment here where we press the red button because there are warnings here about, what in theology you call idolatry. What we call that in public policy or foreign policy is autocracy. Okay, and individual human beings aren't made to have that much power. But practically, speaking, we have an opportunity to solicit feedback, not only from the masses, but that's easy to do. What's much more difficult to do, and what must happen, is we have to allow the individual, normal American, or whatever country that someone's living in. We should give them a front row seat to deciding their future using these digital tools, rather than a small group of people, in commerce or in government making these decisions. We can do this for the first time. We have to use tools. We have to use tools to do it. So there's the push and pull of the policy, but it all comes down to some level of inclusivity, because the fact of the matter is that there are too many people in this conversation, and I say this as an evangelical conservative, okay? There are too many people in this conversation that are, frankly, white, rich, elite, from a few small places, shaping the future for the rest of us. And then we all complain about the way polarization is dividing everyone. And I think that there are intentional things that, we write about Taiwan a lot. A lot of conversation is taking place on the stage about Taiwan here. But the beauty of what they've done in Taiwan is they've actually gone way beyond the proof of concept of welcoming the masses into the decision-making process. I
think, I just came from New York, where it's General Assembly and Climate Week, and I spend a lot of my time focused on that. And that's why this is, I think, where the environment starts to play a little bit of a part. And why did we include that? Because we believe that all of this infrastructure is built on resources that are, have deep geologic time, that are commonly on this earth and in this planet. And I had the honor of presenting a paper, it's on the internet, about policy work around what happens if you don't have the authority and the wealth and the privilege and the infrastructure. How do you make that gap not grow ever wider for those nations and those peoples who are not included? What if you don't have not just the compute speed, but you don't have the adequate capacity to produce the electrons required to power your city or your nation or your people? Where is your voice? And how can we move forward when we're talking about transparency and responsibility without those billions of people factored into the equation? And we take that really personally, in that we're at a moment where we are at the vanguard, being here, being in the United States, talking about these issues, that it becomes a duty and a responsibility to do. And that's part of the governance of what I think the Federalist Papers would look like if they were written today, would be about exactly that. It's sort of why this country was created, was that kind of inclusivity.
And we should be unapologetic about favoring democracies and certain allies that may not entirely share our system but share our values.
Now, this is where it goes.
Well, I do have a question, though, that actually will bring this together. And Mona, you mentioned nature and the environment, so you kind of set this up for me. I am very curious to hear how you feel about it. You offer a highly cooperative vision. And could there more be said about how fair competition is or could be integrated into the highly cooperative vision you offer? Because nature is not simply about fitness, but adaptive fitness is a big part of it.
So, yeah, I think nature doesn't work on a model that's either or. It's not an on-off switch. I think that nature and all systems, including our human systems, have cooperation and competition built into the model. I think every aspect of life on Earth is built on cooperating to compete and competing to cooperate, and I don't think that changes. And I think that that applies for natural systems. I think it applies for governance models, and I was just kidding, Johnnie. It's good. It's probably the source of a great new essay that's coming out from our trio. And I don't think that it's oppositional or antithetical in economic models. I think you do need those things to thrive. They are the underpinnings of what makes our country, splendid and a place of true opportunity and have true responsibility is the fact that we can compete and we can cooperate. At what cost and to whom? Larry's essay about the veto really stuck with me, about those entrenched powers and responsibilities that then do widen the divide when there's not honest and dutiful stewardship over what it means to hold that immense power. So that is cooperation to me, and that is competition. Nature doesn't work. It's not kumbaya. When I was growing up, my father wouldn't let us watch any programmatic shows except for nature channels. And so I had no concept of cartoons and American sitcoms, but I did know what it looked like when a lion decided to have lunch. And there's nothing kumbaya or beautiful or sweet about that. So there is competition and there is cooperation, and that's the natural order of things. And I think that that's the natural order of where this will go to if it falls in line with a healthy and thriving evolution that our human systems will be integrated into. And I think that, if we can account for that, if we can account for that in our stewardship of our resources, if we can hold people truly accountable for their use of those resources and for their governance and stewardships over one another and those materials, I think that would be thriving, and that's where we are now.
So we have questions from the audience.
Uh-oh. Yes.
No, good questions. Great questions, actually. So the first one is, and I think this is something that is in the minds of all of us in this room, is how could you please be more specific about how we can successfully include the voices of those who are excluded? Is it about including different data sets? Is it about tuning the models? Is it about the application of these models? I'm adding, is it about something else?
I mean, I think that, the answer is D. It's all of the above.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sorry to make it overly simplistic, but in all of these conversations, it's a lot of preaching to the choir. And I think it's very, very important that you intentionally reach out to people that are different than you. I mean, just a snapshot of my own story. I was born in the deep South. We moved 21 times before I was 12 years old. We were in pronounced poverty for most of my life. Then someone anonymously scholarshiped me to go to a private school, which totally changed my life. I'm even sitting on this stage, and we're sitting on this stage here together because of mutual friends collaborating on other things who decided that we could bridge the collaboration into this additional area. Building bridges is actually much easier to do if you decide that you're going to walk across the bridge while you're building it. But the fact of the matter is that always isn't the case, and there are some groups that I'm sorry to say, I'll make it positive. We basically are coming on a peace treaty between religion and between science, because the science has brought us to the place of existential moral questions. those on the religious side of the aisle and those on the scientific side of the aisle, we don't even know one another. And the first step is to know one another and to seek out people that are different, to have those conversations. It's much, much easier. And in modern America, it is a superpower in the power of all of us to reach across whatever aisle and to genuinely engage with the person or people that seem the most different from you. And it works 75% of the time. And what you find is you find people who have all the talents, all the ambition, all of these things in all these different areas. It's just much easier to not do the work. But it also changes you too, because then you decide you like people who think differently than you, which upsets the ecosystem.
I would probably take it a little differently. I think we heard, to great effect, Saffron talked about localization today. So in terms of data sets, I think that we know what that looks like in training your data set. At some point, it becomes, an absolute limit. But I do think that the question is, what is it used for? And that's probably where a plurality of voice becomes really important, right? So if we're all participating in the aggregation of the data set, I don't know that that's the right question anymore, is about the value of the sourcing of the data, because we're doing that. There's this inexorable, it gives me this vision of like Star Trek and the Borg, where it's just incessantly wanting to, take things into it. And I think it's more about how it's applied that requires diversity at the table. And I think that we heard that today. We've heard it from all of the participants about what that looks like. I know what would worry me. And I think that we see that. I think that whenever you hear about transparency is always oppositional to strategic national interest and to shareholder value. And so I think that whenever you're talking about opportunities for inclusion or for sharing or for casting a very wide net, there are real implications for real companies and for real nations that have to be considered. And the answer probably lies in the balance of that. So that's one. And then two, and this is maybe where the quality of the data and the wide source of it runs oppositional to something else, is can we develop a way to become inclusive and pluralistic and multi-voiced and safe, and not do the thing that maybe even the framers of this nation didn't do, which would be to run it to a place where it was considered a defense product, or where it was militarized and weaponized against a state or against a people or against others. Right? Who owns that, and how does one safeguard that? And I think that is sort of the point of what inclusivity any technology might bring, but here, using this participatory data from all of us, but here in this nation as well. And that's our responsibility.
That is a point that is perfect for pausing this conversation, because it leaves us with food for thought for the break, which starts now. And actually, in the spirit of this conversation, I would say look around you in the audience and locate someone you have not yet met and try to engage them in a conversation during the break. And please be back by 3:15. Thank you so much, Mona.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johnnie.